Okay, good afternoon everyone. On behalf of IPAA Queensland, I would like to warmly welcome all of you to the first Stewards on the Couch event for 2022, coming to you in its original face-to-face form. It is really exciting to have you here in this room with us, and as I said, we do have 3 satellite venues tonight out in regional Queensland, so welcome to all of those who are in those sites as well. I'd like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which this forum is being hosted tonight, the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. But as is my custom, I also acknowledge the wonderful diversity in our audience tonight, and I pay my respects to all cultures represented. I'd also like to take a moment to pass on a warm hello to all of our personal members who are here tonight. We thank you for continuing to support IPAA in the way that you do, and it's wonderful that you're here as well. And we're really delighted that having attendees from the regions tonight, from Toowoomba, Cairns and Rockhampton, and I hope some of them are a little warmer than we are, but I'm not sure about Toowoomba. I was up there on the weekend and yes, it was really interesting. Continuing with our acknowledgements, obviously, we're grateful also for the senior executive members who are able to make it tonight, or the proxies for those, because as some of you may know, a community cabinet was called out at Stanthorpe. Why Stanthorpe in winter? Yeah. But there are a lot of our intending guests have been called away to that. But we're very grateful to Graham, who is obviously our steward tonight on the couch. We're grateful that he's driven back from Stanthorpe this afternoon to be here in person for this event rather than trying to do it virtually. So thank you for that. We've really enjoyed our Stewards on the Couch series features because it's very informal, and the idea is that we get key leaders from across public purpose sectors, and we've had a really great range of speakers over the years. And it's designed to allow them to give of themselves to you, the audience, meaning that you get to know them for who they are, their history, and what motivates them to get out of bed every morning to be part of the wonderful Queensland public sector in this particular case. It certainly is an opportunity to learn more about the person behind the role, their motivations, their leadership styles, their priorities, and most importantly, their visions for the future. And these conversations often illuminate and share the journey of that individual. Today, as I've indicated, we're privileged to have Graham Fraine on the couch. He is the Director General, Department of Regional Development, Manufacturing and Water. Needless to say, he is standing at the helm of a very important portfolio in today's government here in Queensland. As mentioned in previous IPAA communications, Graham has a career spanning nearly 3 decades of public service, including Deputy Director General roles and Deputy Under-Treasurer. Graham's had a fascinating journey from academic and policy expert to senior public leader, as I know you'll enjoy that journey tonight. I'm also delighted to introduce Dr Anne Tiernan, who has occupied the other seat on the couch tonight. Anne has been a tremendous supporter of IPAA Queensland over the years and is a National Fellow of IPAA itself. Anne is also one of the leading political scientists, not just in Queensland but around Australia, and it's fantastic to have her facilitating tonight's conversation. Her career sits at the interface of strategy, research, policy and practice, and she has been devoted to improving public policy and public purpose outcomes. Anne is deeply passionate about Australia's democratic institutions, as many of you know, and particularly the governor's traditions and ensuring that they reflect and work for all people, particularly those who are vulnerable in our society. Needless to say, she is well placed to sit on the couch with Graham today. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting engagement. And I should also mention Anne has been a council member of IPAA for a number of years until just recently when she stood aside after her, I suppose, transition to the next phase of her life from Griffith as well. But I'm conscious that we're all keen to hear the conversation tonight. And with that, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming Graham, our steward on the couch, and Anne, and I look forward to a really interesting evening. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ian, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to this On the Couch event with Dr Graham Fraine PSM, Director General of the Department of Regional Development, Manufacturing and Water. Now, Ian's introduced me, so I don't need to, but I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we're meeting on tonight, the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and indeed to all First Peoples. Now, I had a look at the list of people who are in attendance tonight, both here and in the 3 regional locations that this event is being live streamed to, and I reckon just about everyone's worked with Graham Fraine over his career in the public sector, and if you haven't, then you should certainly try to. And as we'll hear, he's had a really unusual depth of expertise and experience in transport policy, which he couples with experience of not 1 but 2 central agencies, premiers and Treasury. Very unusual, can I tell you, as someone who's been around too long, very unusual for someone to bring that depth and breadth of experience. He's worked in universities and local government, and I think this broad experience really distinguishes Graham, both within your own portfolio, I think, Graham, but also as a member of the Queensland Government Leadership Board. You've seen Graham's bio, you've heard us talk a bit about it, but I'm going to invite him shortly to tell us a bit about his journey to becoming DG. It's really great to have this opportunity for people to hear from Graham and for me to moderate this conversation for IPAA Queensland. And for new members, and remember we've only just got IPAA back up working again after a little absence over the last couple of years. These events are a really important opportunity to hear, as Ian has said, about the people who lead the public sector. And I think tonight to hear about the formative experiences that shape their practice and their craft of public administration. And people know I always use that term intentionally. But they're also an opportunity for people like Graham as new leaders, even though they've been around for a long time, to outline their agenda for their department. And I think that's a really important opportunity for us tonight, and also what they've learned on the, well, long and arduous path to becoming a Director General. Before we start, a brief disclosure. Graham and I have been colleagues and friends for about 15 years. Although we work in different sectors, we've been peers for a long time. That's, of course, until he headed off into the stratosphere. Our careers ran in parallel for a long time, crossing over periodically in areas of mutual and shared interest, particularly around policy, I think, public sector governance and reform, but also at different times around our own careers and things we might do. We've collaborated on research, capability building, community engagement, and particularly something I know we've really got in common is trying to bridge the divide between government and universities. And I mention that as context to the discussion in case you think I'm a bit fierce with him. But I think too, and particularly for younger members or newer IPAA members, I think there's a really important lesson there about the value of professional networks, of people who you can learn with and from, and who can help us along the way. And I want to come back to that. I think there's something there about policy communities that I think it would be good if we could pick up. So our conversation is going to canvass 4 broad themes, but really Graham can do whatever he wants because he's both the Director General and the person on the couch. I want to talk about his formative experiences, I want to talk about his reflections on the journey to becoming a DG, including the decision to move up to senior roles, because there's a number of reasons why you wouldn't do that. Increasingly, I think people are concluding around the Westminster world. So I'm interested to get you to reflect on that a bit. We're also going to talk a bit about his priorities for the department. And of course I would ask this, wouldn't I? Given the change of federal government, I'll be asking for his preliminary assessment of whether and how that changes the opportunity context of some of the priorities in your portfolio. I would have thought so, but I'm very interested to hear. And then finally, as many of you will be aware, Professor Professor Peter Coldrake's review of culture and accountability in the Queensland public sector released its interim report on the 21st of April. Its final report's due at the end of the month. I want to take the opportunity to canvass some of Graham's views about public sector capability and about some of the preliminary observations noted in that interim report and what I think we can expect will come in the final one. So we'll leave plenty of time for questions, and for the people who are joining us in Rockhampton, Cairns and Toowoomba, please be thinking about your questions and you can send them in to the IPAA team down the back who'll be moderating them. So, Graham, we first met in about 2007, by my recollection, when you were the Assistant Director in the Transport Policy Office. You had an interesting career before you joined and you've done lots of interesting things since. But tell us about your career journey, maybe the people, experiences, and I'm always interested in the ideas that shaped you and your leadership.
Excellent, thank you. And hello all, and hello people in the regions. And thank you very much to IPAA for having me up here as a shy introvert. These are always fascinating experiences for me, but they're very formative ones nonetheless. And thank you, Anne. I think, by way of background, for me, in a very quick snapshot, Sydney-born, North Queensland raised. Primary school on the northern beaches of Cairns and high school in Malanda on the Atherton Tableland. So having just spent the last couple of days in Toowoomba and Stanthorpe, very much reminds me of running cross country in high school up on the Tableland, similar temperatures. I post-school, and certainly it's been a feature of my career, post-school, wasn't really sure what I was going to do, knew I was going to go to uni in some way, shape or form, sort of fell into psychology as something that sounded interesting and looked interesting, and that pretty much is the story of my career in that sense. And I've always been not so much jealous, but in awe of people who have known from a very early age what they wanted to be, where they wanted to be, what they wanted to do. And to me it shows there are many ways to run a career, which we might talk about later. My entry into the Queensland public sector was in 1993. I had finished my psychology degree a couple of years earlier. I'd started doing a PhD, during which I played a fair bit of golf, drank a fair bit of beer, didn't do a hell of a lot of PhDing, and decided that after probably 16, 18 years in educational institutions, it was time to get out and see the world a little bit. And that's when I applied for a role as a behavioural scientist in the road safety unit of Queensland Transport, as it was back then. And I mentioned the psychology piece for a couple of reasons. One is because as a very passionate public servant, and as someone that is quite happy to talk about the public service and what we have to offer, both by way of value, in terms of what we contribute to our communities, and certainly by way of value that we have for people as a career. The first thing I would say as a reflection on having done psychology and coming into the public sector is if you look around the public sector at the breadth and the diversity of skill sets and the diversity of life experiences and degrees, there are very few experiences you can have from that professional experience that are not suited to providing value in the Queensland public sector. And I think certainly one thing around, I think the competitive advantage, if you like, we have as a sector is in our ability to provide that both experience of opportunity and that experience to work with others from different backgrounds. And what I mean by that, and diversity has many different senses, as we all know, and the one I'm simply talking about here at the moment is from that professional background. So I went to uni at James Cook Uni in Townsville. Well done. The natural enemy of the psychology students at James Cook Uni were the engineering students. You could not get two more different worldviews and different ways of understanding how the world operated. And, there was running, all in good spirit, but, running practical jokes and running just different ways of viewing the world. When I first joined the Queensland public sector, there's basically, three groups of people that do the work of road safety in a public policy sense. The first group are law enforcement officials, but the second two are people with a behavioural science background and people with an engineering background. And what struck me from very early on in the piece working in government was that synergistic effect you get from those different people and their different perspectives of the world coming together, working towards a common goal. Because the engineers could give a perspective on issues that, those of us with the brain wired for the behavioural sciences, wouldn't naturally do, and vice versa. And if you look at so many fields of public policy and the hard work that we have to do, and I'll talk about complexity, in a while, the value and the joy you get from working with those different disciplines to unpack problems and put them back together again as solutions is critical. So, the first thing for me is around that. And you talk, my early days, I spent about 20 years in transport and main roads, give or take 3.5 years where I went and did a PhD proper, as opposed to the golf and other activities PhD. The second really valuable thing for me in my early period of working in transport and main roads was the strength of character in the leaders that I had during that period, in terms of strength of ideas, generosity of spirit, and willingness to mentor those of us coming through. And, some people in this room will know the likes of the Gary Mahns, the Tony Cursiuses, the Paul Blakes, those who took time to take an interest in those that they work with and take time to sit and discuss.
And can I just editorialise there for a sec? Because what was clear about those people was that they were distinguished by the people they brought through. So they were known as people developers in the system, which was a virtuous circle of also being able to attract people.
Yeah, exactly. So TMR for me, in that sort of spiritual home sense, in a professional sense, will always speak to me very strongly about giving me that basis of understanding the strength of diversity in who comes to work on the problems we have or the issues we seek to confront, and an understanding, in that initial sense around journey to leadership space.
But even there, your experience was unusual because you were an unusual policy person. Then you went and did customer stuff, you went and did other operational stuff, right? Can you just talk a bit about that? Because I think, the split between, the implementation gap kind of arises from those two split worlds. I think you took the time to get the 360-degree view.
Yeah. And again, the other thing that I have always valued about working in the Queensland public sector is you have that opportunity. And, again, in sort of the style, if you call it that, of my career of looking at things that look interesting and saying, how about we go and do some of that. I did branch from road safety into other forms of safety, then into licensing, registration, customer service, and a lot of customer experience work that we did in TMR at the time, which then allowed me to jump into that central agency space in about 2016, I think, when I went across into a couple of years in DPC as the Deputy DG for Policy, and then later back into the Deputy Under Treasurer role. And certainly what I picked up, from those central agency roles is that much broader understanding of what I would call the spider web of the issues that we deal with in government. Because as I think many people, if not all people in this room know, so many of the policy issues that we deal with in particular agencies are connected to policy issues in other agencies. And to some degree, a number of us that are working in quite different spaces on the surface of it are actually working on exactly the same thing. And we see this, and everyone will be, I imagine, having discussions at the moment, and we certainly are in our portfolio, around the regional economic development space and how post-COVID opportunities for regional growth being linked to availability of workforce, availability of workforce being linked to availability of housing being linked to transport connections and various other elements.
Connectivity, foundational economy.
That's right. And how if you use that analogy of touching one part of the spider's web, it starts to set other bits off over here. And so that central agency experience, and for anyone who is interested in that, and I think when we come to talk about capability, one of the things that I think there is opportunity for not just Queensland, but for a number of public sectors to do that mobility opportunity of how we work our staff in and out of central agencies. It's critical to understanding that breadth of what we do as government, but also some of the great similarities in the underlying issues that all of us are dealing with, to then try and get to, one of the things for me is always about, and sorry for the psych term, but always that meta conversation. So when you're running into policy problems, it's asking, well, what's underlying it? What's the conversation about the conversation that we need to be having? And so that central agency time taught me that. I spent 12 months in local government. For those that know my story, I've lived on the Sunshine Coast for now 13 years, I think, and in 2018 I took the opportunity to go and live or work where I lived.
To not commute 4 hours a day.
That's right. But life had other plans for me after that 12 months. But I would say, as well in terms of mobility, anyone that's interested in the craft of government, getting some time in local government is spectacularly good to do. It is the level of government that is closest to its community in that sense, and gives you a really valuable experience, both in terms of how policy and programs of other levels of government play out, certainly in terms of how you deal with issues that are important to local communities, but also to look at how governance operates in another level of government as well. And for me, some of the fascinating opportunity I got to spend time in a council chamber during council meetings and to understand the rhythm and flow of how that operates. As someone who's a bit of a governance nerd, that was fascinating as well. So that's a very round answer, but that's sort of, for me, the key things that have sort of shaped the style and the sort of questions I bring to the work I do.
The other thing, of course, about his psychology is you're not sure if he's diagnosing you when you're disagreeing with him. No. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Hey, the Coldrake Review is considering the need for the public sector to be fit for purpose, Graham, to respond to changing dynamics that everybody here has experienced. And, I've been around a long time and have seen, but you've actually been front row seat to a lot of those kind of issues. What does fit for purpose look like, do you think? And what do you see as the key challenges and opportunities in responding to that assertion, which is easy to make, right?
Yeah. Look, I think fit for purpose for government, in one sense, is what it has always been. Again, those who know me know that I often roll out a Lincoln quote, and that quote is that the legitimate object of government is to do for a group of people what it cannot do for itself in either an individual or joint capacity. And for me, that really hones in on two things. One is we are here for the communities we serve. And again, to talk about being a public servant, for me, it's very much about operating in service of. And for me, that is no different today to what it was in the 1850s, probably when Lincoln would have said that in a different context. So the element for me of our context being around serving the community is as it has always been. Government is not an end to itself. And I think when government does best is when it has its mind very focused on that task. I think what is of great interest in these times is some of the context in which government operates, and sometimes where our citizens seek their views and seek their answers from. And I think one of the challenges for government is about how we remain relevant to the communities we serve. Government, and apologies to any anarchists in the room or on camera, government will always be here in some form. Westminster style or Westminster, and that's a whole separate debate. I think the real opportunity for us in government is how, in servicing the communities, we are best keeping pace with what their aspirations are. And that is where there is a lot of other parts of the system. Our elected reps, as a for example, have a lot to contribute in terms of the sector understanding where our communities are at. So I think, for me, that's a bit of the context that we need to work in. And I think beyond that, again, the bit that's probably always the case for me, it's about clarity on our ambition. It's a lot of things come back to, and it's not always easy to do because the nature of the issues we deal with are complex and overlapping, but that clarity of vision, clarity of purpose, clarity of task, if you can get those three things relatively clear up front, then you stand a fighting chance.
Well, that's probably a pretty good segue to your department. I've had a bit of a look at the strategic plan and objectives that you've kind of outlined for local manufacturing, sustainable water use and creating opportunities in Queensland's regions. And I mean, it should be a great time for that, right? As you've said. Tell us about your priorities for the department and how they connect with the things that I'm interested in and that the Queenslanders are interested in, I think, with opportunities to make the place more prosperous and inclusive. I think for many government agencies and those that have been around for a while and have seen the way governments form both their objectives, their overarching objectives, and in the case of the current government, it's those statement of objectives for the community, and how they set their government departments up for that. For me, in the case of something like regional development, manufacturing and water, it's about the sum of the parts. There will always be specific elements and parts of what we do as a department that are unique and idiosyncratic within the shape of a government department, but it's also about what do you do as the sum of the parts. And for us, it is really around how is the work that we do contributing to more prosperous communities? And prosperous has a couple of senses to it. One is certainly an economic sense, and the work that we are looking at doing in a range of places, be it the general regional development, be it some of the manufacturing, be it
what we are doing around water allocations, what we're doing around water capital is certainly around that economic prosperity of a community. But prosperity is about so much more. And one of the things that this government is very clear on in its expectations for government is that we should be looking at things that are about communities throughout this state, not simply for areas of the southeast, where our cities, our towns are places where people want to be. So part of that absolutely is economic development, and it's about employment, it's about a lot of the work on new industries that are coming, but it's also about a sense of place, and it's also about an understanding of how, with some of the transitions that we will be going through in either an economic or a social sense over coming decades, how government works with the communities themselves, works with industry to chart a deliberative course for where we are looking to take our communities. And for anyone, John Daly formerly from the Grattan Institute.
Now at the University of Melbourne, I think.
One thing I always remember him saying and always disagreeing with him on he's a great brain, John Daly, for anyone that gets the chance. But I remember him saying that any efforts to keep regional cities and towns alive is bucking 2,000 years of human history because effectively of that agglomeration to cities. While history would suggest that John's got something on his side there, I also look at the nature of a state like Queensland, and everyone's heard the line many times about the most decentralised state in the nation. But it's also about, if you look at the opportunities that are coming for a number of our regional areas in this state, either through the opportunity space of what's coming with new industries and future opportunities, or indeed through things that have come up more as a result of pandemic and the need to look at onshoring, the national security issues, which again in the manufacturing space you're looking at onshoring. Yeah. I think there are real opportunities around how we can chart that future with our community. So, a key role for our agency is to be a key part of that conversation. And we also, and one of my deputies, Linda Dobe, is in the audience tonight, and Linda has a deep and quite amazing sense of knowledge in our water resource management space. The other key thing for us as an agency, and for a number of our agencies, is that we are looking after our communities, but we are looking after our environment in that space as well.
So can I just press you on two things there?
You can.
So from what I recall of the agency that was brought together, the biggest part is water, and that is very technical in many ways and very, thank God, very expert and specific in many of the things that it has to do. The regional development part is pretty small, and the manufacturing part is pretty small. So all agencies have dominant repertoires, dominant policy styles, some of which may or may not be congruent with the kinds of inclusive strategies or, many people are watching New South Wales very interestingly in terms of some of its gender budget approaches that it's taking. Yep. So how are you going to, and engineers and technocratic experts, yep. How are you going to inject some of that new thinking into those strategies? Because the old approaches to regional development in Queensland and elsewhere were predicated on people not really wanting to stay there and those opportunities not being there really, and about trying to keep things alive. Yeah.
So as an agency, in terms of getting us into the space we need to be, there's a few things we've done as a leadership team, but also as an agency, and I'll talk to that. The first is we have fundamentally gone back and revisited our strategic plan. So the strategic plan you refer to and have read will be replaced by a strategic plan that you will see when it emerges gets that integration piece a lot more. So it's less about, we've got to have, we've got those three parts to our agency in the name. It's less about making sure that in every statement from vision to purpose to objectives to strategy, that those three terms are mentioned in each of those things. It's more, again, asking ourselves, what is the sum of the parts? And starting that as the conversation. So the first piece is a refresh of what we understand our strategic plan to be. The second is, and we have already started to do this, is to align our structure with that. The third piece is to align our culture with that. And we have at the moment a staff reference group that I think at last count was somewhere between 50 and 60 strong. And their first task has been to do a behaviours charter for the organisation, which both supports, the existing values charter that we have as a sector and is in legislation, but is really at its heart around what do we want it to be like to work here? If it's a set of conversations around what are our aspirational goals in this space and what do we want to live up to, this is what they are, and we'll be launching that later this week. And it is work that has come to the departmental leadership team for comment and review, but it has been drafted and built from that bottom-up perspective from the staff. And then our journey beyond that is, the first step is getting one of those documents. The second step is, well, how do you take that out for a spin? Because as we all know with culture, the real vibe around culture is, well, what's it actually like to work here? And we as leaders, quite rightly, will be held to account for how's it really like to work around here compared to what do we say it's like to work around here. And so that's, that for me is an exciting journey. And then our fourth piece is the workforce strategy that needs to do that. So they're the sorts of pieces we're working on as an agency to ensure we are in our best position to do the work that we need to do as part of that broader piece.
Well, I reckon it's about to get a bit more exciting in your portfolio, actually, because the change of government, Labor's made some really bold commitments.
Yep.
The National Reconstruction Fund, local manufacturing, the energy transition, and lots of other things that they're talking about. How are you thinking about that? And how are you positioning for that within this new plan that you've got? Because the Commonwealth won't have the capacity to do lots of the things that it wants to do, and I think Glenn Davis will be discovering that in week 2 in PM&C. And I think actually Labor ministers understand that the Commonwealth needs to get out of the way of lots of different things too. So I think there's actually going to be quite an interesting federal agenda. I always think that, and then it peters out. But I am an optimist, like I'd have to be in this game.
Yeah.
So how are you positioning for it, and what are you thinking?
Yeah, look,
and what should people be looking for in terms of the opportunities?
So, and you're quite right, for anyone that looks in the space that we deal with, there are some, there were during the campaign, some big promises made around a number of things. For instance, the $100 million battery manufacturing precinct to be in Gladstone, in central Queensland.
Cabinet's meeting there on Wednesday.
Exactly.
Federal cabinet.
So for me, it's about two things. One is, again, going back to having clarity of what are the issues we want to prosecute in that space with a new government when there's a change of government down in Canberra, regardless of the colour of government. And the discussions we're having internally at the moment are around, if we understand and identify who our key departments and ministers are down in Canberra, what are the areas that are the ones that we need to start really hitting. And then for me, in that context, an opportunity where new federal governments, at least initially, and and there's a bit of history about the degree to which the initial enthusiasm holds, come in with an interest in IGR, intergovernmental work. Some governments keep that momentum up, others, they peter out quickly. So for me, the first thing is to be in the space to take opportunity in that early piece, and the second is to use the line of a former Prime Minister. We're from Queensland and we're here to help.
Yeah. Well, I think that's probably a good strategy.
Because they will be, and I think from what we see, are turning their minds to how do we now make some of this real, and to have potential partners in doing that who have ideas and can bring those to the table becomes, again, something that simply puts you in the best possible position to take advantage of that circumstance in a non-Machiavellian way. But
in a context, strategic sense-making kind of way, which is what we expect public servants to do. But I've been saying to people, it wasn't a small target. Lots and lots of stuff is out there in terms of the government's plans, and Albanese's been quite interesting on the what is as important, or the how is as important as the what. And I think there's really something for people to think about, and I think you're spot on. I'm glad to hear you're muscling up intergovernmentally, Graham, because I always worry about that.
and this Prime Minister, we know from when in a previous government he was the Minister for Infrastructure and Transport, oversaw some very key national reforms, and so he has an interest in this space.
He does, for sure. Okay, well, look, the time goes really quickly, so let's come to the fourth thing I wanted to ask you about, and then I want to open it up to people for questions. We know that, from experience here and internationally, that the issue of public sector capability has long been a cause for concern, right? There's a long literature and debate about it. In the Commonwealth, the independent review of the APS raised issues about this, and the interim report of Professor Coldrake's review also cited it, along with, my personal favourite, the role of ministerial staff, among its preliminary observations, and it promised to say more about this. What, from your perspective, are the key issues impacting on public sector capability? How should we be thinking about it in the context of collaboration and partnership? I might ask you that first.
Yeah. I think for me it's about, in the capability sense of understanding a few things. One is, what do we see as the opportunity and life cycle for a public servant in this state? And for me, that travels everything from, there are some wonderful graduate programs that we currently run and operate in the Queensland public sector. How do we best use those? How do we best use things like cadetships? How do we best utilise ways of bringing people into the sector? And we know, as a Gen X, that the temptation is to look at Gen Ys and millennials and the generations that come beyond from that perspective of, the stereotype is, they're in 5 weeks and they already want my job. My reframing of that is that you've got generations coming through who are driven by experience and driven by looking for a variety of experience and different opportunities. And I maintain that the Queensland public sector, like other public sectors, but the public sector and all the different roles we have, all the different places we operate, and all the services we offer, within that one sector, there is so much opportunity for variety in how you want to structure a career. So I think that how we're bringing and selling ourselves to potential employees is really critical. I think at the other end, maybe as X's as we get towards this part of our life.
Get a bit tired in your 50s.
How we are managing our cohorts, currently sort of the boomers, but soon to be the X's, in terms of how we manage. I think a lot of people have come to the conclusion of, not a lot of people fully or formally retire anymore. How we actually understand that as a construct to bring value into the public sector, I think is critical. So for me, the first thing is that whole of life cycle. Second thing, as I've already talked about, is mobility, and how we use mobility to build capability, and how ultimately we use it to build capacity.
But it is hard. And we have tried.
It is hard, and I would say that mobility is not simply within the sector, and it is no easier necessarily, but mobility between the public sector and other sectors that work within the sort of ecosystem of getting stuff done for communities, whether it be the NGO sector, industry sectors. It is not easy, absolutely, and there have been efforts that have met with various levels of success. But, the old adage of, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's not worth doing. I think that is a key area for us to crack. I think a third thing for me is getting that embedded understanding, and I've talked a couple of times about the power of the skill sets we have in the public sector, how we harness and nurture those skill sets.
And maybe make them more explicit.
Them.
Yeah. Which I think other public sector reform agendas have done kind of in other places.
Yeah, absolutely. And how we, with the mobility bit and the whole of life cycle bit, how we put that to best use to bring those different skill sets together to work on the complexity of problems we've got.
In the multidisciplinary way that you kind of
Absolutely. Because if you, and I'm probably putting too many dimensions up, but if you think of the complexity dimension with the what's really going on here dimension, what are the underlying policy issues that some of the policy issues we're dealing with are more the symptom than the cause? If we can bring some of that and then, combine that, as another dimension with place, the government around the world that can crack that, and that's a degree of difficulty, that is no mean feat. But whoever can crack that owns the future.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you would have thought that, with our experience here, we ought to be those people. Just finally, before I open it up to people, I know you and members of the Leadership Board, like public sector stewards everywhere, and I talk to people in all jurisdictions, they're worried about this. They're worried about sustainability, they're worried about operational tempo, and they're worried about psychological safety, actually, given the relentless demands and occasionally the behaviour of our principals, ALS. So, what are some key insights about that you'd like to share?
Thank you for that question.
Well, it's a live debate in Victoria. It's a live debate in New South Wales,
and it's a live experience here. And I think for any public servant in the room, the experience over COVID, and notwithstanding, one thing I respond to quite viscerally is the occasional comment you get about, well, how do you know if public servants working from home are being productive? In my lived experience, and I think this is the lived experience of this public sector per se, is that the working from home period and the general experience of COVID saw exceptionally high levels of productivity to deal with very immediate, clear and present dangers. And the thing, one reflection for government, as always, is how you take that that energy that happens from either being in a pandemic or being in a natural disaster, and applies it to those other times of BAU in that sense. And I think from my view, the way to unlocking that is there are equally compelling timeframes that we need to be working to around energy, climate, a whole range of things that if we reframe them, provide us that ability to go with the clarity of purpose, vision and task. It gives that time imperative that unlocks that. But that's another topic that I'm wandering into. I think one of the challenges for leaders and for Leadership Board, and certainly that we're discussing at both Leadership Board and within the department, is I think one of the elements of the work from home is not so much that it's made anyone less productive, it has further blurred the line between home and work. You are closer to your machine from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed. And we know, we all know, and it's not just a public sector thing, all workplaces are hungry beasts. The more you feed it, the more it will ask of you. And so I think one of the real challenges for us as leaders in the sector is how we chart that journey of the productivity of the sector with the well-being of the sector.
And there's a few boundary issues there too, I would have thought. Let me open it up to questions then. So please raise your hand, make sure it's a question, and maybe let us know where you're from. And Andrew, have we got any questions coming in from the regions? Well, I think people in the regions need to try harder and send their questions in, please. It'd be a shame for you to miss out. Questions for Graham, please. Thank you, Tanya. I didn't want to have an awkward silence and have to pick someone out.
Tanya Hornick, Australian.
There's a microphone coming so that our friends in the regions can hear you.
Thank you.
Hey, Tanya.
Hey, Graham. Thank you for those insights. Greatly appreciated. Tanya Hornick from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I'm actually going to turn it back to you personally and professionally at the moment, if that's okay. What's one piece of advice that you've received that you've really held on to and helped shape your career? And what's the one piece of advice that you always give to people when helping shape their careers?
Okay. Thank you. Good question. Very good question. I think the one piece of advice that was the best advice to me was own your own power. Power is a very complex beast.
There's a fantastic new book out about it that I can recommend.
And as I mentioned earlier, and again, those who know me know that I on occasion talk about being the shy introvert, and certainly one of the things I have had to do on my journey into leadership is to actually own the power of the role that I am entering into. And by that, I mean owning the decision making and owning the setting of direction for the area you are all about. Now, I guess what I mean by that is it's not about being more or less consultative with your staff or getting into the dictatorial or not, but it really is at the end of the day, the roles that we sit in as leaders have delegated decision-making accountabilities associated with them. And I had to learn that me sitting around either consulting endlessly or not really making decisions or so on was not doing any of us any favours. And so that piece of advice to me around understand your relationship to the power of the role you are in, and a small p, not a capital P, was one that was very valuable very valuable to me, and I still, to this day, sometimes grapple with, but nonetheless, it was a very sage piece of advice given to me. The piece of advice I tend to give to people, particularly those embarking on their own leadership journey, is understand who you are in the context of being a leader. And again, this probably reflects in a sense some of the journey I went on about thinking there is a particular style or approach of leadership that works and that is the answer. And I think my reflection at this stage of 54 and a half is there's certainly some styles of leadership that do not work. There is no one style of leadership that does work. And that's where, for me, that word around authenticity always has value, because it's about bring yourself as who you are to your leadership role. So that, someone who is the shy introvert, and for any other shy introverts in the room or online, very good book called The Introverted Leader. For me to try and be a gregarious, extroverted leader would not be a pretty sight. But for those who are gregarious and or extroverted, absolutely. So it's about understanding who you are and what you bring to the role, because we all, the different, again, many different dimensions of personality, but we all bring something different to our jobs that we do every day. Therefore, we bring something different to our role as leaders, and they are all something valuable in that sense. And there is no one successful leader mould, in my view.
Other questions? I once saw you carpet someone, and that's the day I knew you probably would be a DG, because I wasn't sure whether you were steely enough, but I saw you do it. Nicely, but clearly. Whoa. Other questions? Julie Battilana is that book, The New Power. Very interesting.
Hello everyone, we've got a question from the regions here that I'd just like to ask. Graham, we've got Grant asking, how can regional teams best influence policy settings being made in Brisbane?
Yeah, that is thank you, Grant. That is an excellent question that is currently exercising Leadership Board's mind, and Leadership Board will be having a discussion around this very soon. And as a number of people in this room will be aware, for a number of years now there have been senior officer networks in the regions that have operated at various levels of engagement from central government. And we've also, since about 2018-19, had the work that DPC are doing in the community fora. So there is a real opportunity that we're talking about in Leadership Board around how, in Leadership Board exercising its role as the stewards of the system and determining some of the priorities, how is that informed by leaders and others in the regional space in our regions, whether it be through the work of the community fora, whether it be through the work of the senior officers network, and how does that work then feed down and get supported from the central part of government in that space. And I think the work, as I said, we'll be discussing it in the next couple of weeks at Leadership Board, will start to unpack some of that to help support. There are some great, anyone that's had a chance to get out to one of either some of the RMCNs or other names that the senior officers networks go by, they do some spectacular work and have been doing so for a while. The discussion at Leadership Board is, how do we lift the profile of that and give it a bit of consistency and give it that set of priorities?
And they used to be so powerful in the early 90s when I came back from Canberra. They certainly were a force to be reckoned with then. Time for one more. Please.
Hello, I'm Jo Clark from DMW. I actually had a question that popped into my head that Anne mentioned earlier on, which was, how did you have to grapple with the decision to go forward and become the big boss, or was it an easy? How did you come to that?
Yeah. How long have we got?
It went on for about 5 years, I remember.
Where do I even start? That's a very good question. Thank you for picking up on Anne's mentioning of it earlier. It is certainly in my experience, and I will simply talk to my experience in this space. And I should have done a product disclosure statement earlier in terms of, anything I say is simply one person's experience. I think for me, that pattern I had of this looks interesting, how about we go and do some of that, I think saw me get to a certain level of leadership, say at around that sort of executive director / general manager level, just through courses of events without having to think too hard about what am I doing in a sense of career planning, or what are my ambitions in how far up a ladder I might seek to go, because there's a whole homeostatic concept of balance where which I won't get into because that'll take too long and take me away from the question. I think once I moved beyond that level, the sorts of things that came into my mind and I had to give serious thought about were issues of how far do I want to go in terms of that leadership space as opposed to any particular content area. And for someone that spent, probably the first 15 years of my career in that road safety and regulation and licensing space, that was probably the first conversation I had to have with myself about getting into the prospect of working in broader areas of government and what did I think of that, and then also getting to levels where you have more direct influence in the broader decision making of government. You have less of a day-to-day influence about the topics that you may have a per se interest in. So the decision points for me in that sense have always been about asking myself those elements, along with the third element of how does that sit with non-work life? How does that sit with the balance that I do either seek to have or indeed at times not seek to have with what's going on with family and just work or outside of work experience. And for me, in terms of making the step into a Director General role, was probably less about asking those questions as it was when I went to the deputy roles in central agencies. Because those deputy roles in those central agencies are pretty similar to a DG role. So those were the areas for me where I had to ask myself, that question about, breadth versus depth, about leadership of people and decision making as opposed to particular passion pieces that you may have, and then that bit about balance with other elements of life. Because once you step into these sorts of roles, and particularly, again, for living on the Sunshine Coast, we live on 2.5 acres and I love it dearly. I don't see it a lot, particularly during winter. Those are the sorts of things you work, and they're the decisions different people make. You can achieve balance even at these sorts of levels. It's about knowing your boundaries and how you manage yourself in that space.
And I think since you didn't say it, I might just say that the opportunity context actually has been quite challenging, hasn't it? I had a question that I decided to go on from because, you know, we had changes of government in 96, 98, 2012 and 2015, and we had a change of Premier in 2007. So there's been tremendous turbulence at the senior levels, at leadership levels, and I think that has given, well, I mean, it's both forestalled opportunities, but it's also given people pause to think, is that really where I want to be? So I won't invite you to comment on that because we're out of time. Thank you, Graham. I'm going to hand back to Ian. Sorry if we went a little bit over time, but it was great to have a question from Grant up there in Cairns. And hopefully our regional people are able to stay with us while Ian concludes.
Absolutely. Thank you. So it comes to an end in one way. On behalf of everyone in our audience tonight, I'd like to extend the warmest of thanks to Anne and Graham for this really fantastic conversation tonight. And it was insightful, it was entertaining, and I hope it was challenging, really something for everyone in our audience to grab hold of. So can you please, everyone, join with me in thanking them for tonight. Conversations and events like Stewards on the Couch have an important place in our public purpose network, particularly in face-to-face forums like this, and isn't it wonderful that we're here? This has really provided an opportunity for all of us to engage, to connect and to learn, and I'm sure that all of us have learned something tonight. The career journeys of our most senior public servants often encompass fantastic stories like tonight, with themes and plot lines that we can all take something away from. My personal favourite tonight was the broad interpretation of prosperous regions, and I wonder what yours is. Before I close tonight's event, though, I would like to thank all of you for coming, particularly again to those of you who have joined us from the regions tonight. I hope that you'll stay on for a few moments to catch up and chat with the people wherever you are, whether in this room or in the regions. And it is absolutely fabulous to have the ability and the opportunity to do it again. I'd like to extend my warmest thanks to the IPAA team, led by our wonderful Andrew. For those of you who knew Patty, she moved on at the end of last year, and of course Andrew has taken on the job, and he's doing a sterling job as being the leader of the team. So well done to you, Andrew. I think all of you will agree it's been a fabulous event tonight. And there's many more events coming up in the IPAA event calendar, and I invite you to keep informed as to what is happening and when. The next event is the Francis Adamson Oration, taking place next Thursday, the 23rd of June, which also happens to be the UN-sponsored Public Service Day internationally. This is a new national IPAA oration, and we're excited to support its launch this year and the celebration of something everyone here tonight is passionate about: public service. Details for this event have been shared on our IPAA's social channels, so I recommend you visit our LinkedIn page, for instance, for more details, which happens to also be a great segue nicely into my next point. I invite you to follow IPAA Queensland on our social channels. It is here that we regularly share details, news, important info related to public purpose work. But the next part is the best part, and that is that you get to stay and have a bit of a chat. Even if you've only got a few moments, come and join us for a drink and a nibble. For those of you in this room, if you make sure that you turn right when you leave the doorway, and we're in the foyer just beside these rooms. Thank you all for coming again. We really, really do appreciate your support, and please, can we finish by again thanking Anne and Graham for a wonderful evening.